Everything is from the one, many from the one. We know this to be true because Daryl Clark says so. And, you know, the oldest extant scripture we have in any tradition, to my knowledge, is the Rig Veda from the Hindu tradition. It's probably 5,000 years old, but it was passed down verbally before that, and we don't know exactly when it was first conceived or given to humankind, as the case may be, depending on your belief system. But you know what the first line is in that? Truth is one. Sages call it by different names. And we just had 5 sages over here. And no joke, I mean, the diversity and unity come together. One beautiful job with the band, seriously. And yet everybody's doing their own thing. Jeffrey, Frank, Bob, Ian, and Daryl. They're all doing something a little bit differently, but they harmonize beautifully. And this is what in Hinduism they call Rita, the order in the universe. And this was a brief manifestation of order in the universe, Rita. Now, interestingly enough, in Hindu belief, and by the way, Hindus don't call themselves Hindu. That's a term that was actually started by Muslims who came in, and then it was picked up by, you guessed it, the British Empire. And so the Brits, what the words the Brits pick up usually get spread around the world, and Hindu is certainly one of those words. But what do Hindus themselves refer to what they're doing? They'll say they follow the Sanatana Dharma. There are different kinds of Dharma, order in the universe, as it were, but Sanatana Dharma means the timeless Dharma, the timeless way of being, the timeless order. It doesn't change. Now, it's weighed by other aspects of Dharma. There's something called the Yuga Dharma, which has to do with the Dharma of the age. Right now, we are called to do something different, something similar, but something different in 2023 than people were in other years in the past. And then there's your personal Dharma, your personal duty, as it were. Probably the Western word that would come closest might be vocation. You can think of your job as a job and you get a paycheck and so forth, but what brings it alive is when it's a vocation, when it's a calling. And this is how people in the East look at this idea of Dharma. Now, originally there was this order in the universe called Rita. And I find this fascinating. It's not that God created the universe in the Hindu cosmology. It's that the universe created the gods. The universe was there first. And the universe, in order to keep order, as it were, in the universe, Rita created these gods. And it was the gods who created humankind. And the Rig Veda actually tells people how that came about. There was a body, a guy, the original sort of the atom, as it were, who formed the original body, and he got, for lack of a better term, stomped by somebody who was a different part of himself. These all are manifestations of one of the gods, Shiva, the destroyer. And the legend goes that his head became one of the castes, the Brahmin caste, and his arms and chest became the warrior caste. And his legs became the Vaishya caste. The Vaishyas are like farmers and artisans, things like that. And the Shudras, the servants. And there's a group solo. They're thought of as being too low to even have a caste. They're outcasts, literally. the Dalit, otherwise known as untouchables. Now, Mahatma Gandhi in the 20th century started referring to these people as Harijan, which means the people of God. And Gandhi he himself grew up in a caste. He was part of the warrior caste. But how did he manifest the warrior caste? Here's one of my favorite virtues. It's called ahimsa, nonviolence. And Gandhi, if you've ever seen the movie about Gandhi starring Ben Kingsley, it is amazing. It is a very hard movie to watch, but God, is it good. And before he was leader of the Indian independence movement, he went to South Africa and he was fighting apartheid in South Africa. And there are these scenes where he just says, if they beat you, you just have to take it. That's how we practice ahimsa. And there are scenes of these guys, these police guys just beating him, and he just takes it. But he says, that's where the power of being a warrior comes from. The ability to be radically peaceful. You know, there's a sense that everybody does carry peace within them, somewhere in there. God knows it's pretty well hidden in some people. But speaking of South Africa, Nelson Mandela was in jail for 27 years, I believe, Robben Island. And yet, when they made him president of South Africa, he had a lot of people on the stage with him, one of whom was his jailer, interestingly enough. And, Dr. King took a lot of ideas, actually, and spirit from Mahatma Gandhi. And let me tell you about how he manifested radical forgiveness. His reward, as it were, earthly reward for spearheading the Indian independence movement, was that he was assassinated. And as he lay dying, he said, "Bring that guy to me, please. The guy who just shot me, bring him here." And he forgave that guy. He told that guy he forgave him. And then he spent the rest of his life, which was maybe a half hour, I don't know the exact time, in a mantra. Third chakra mantra is Ram. Ram, Ram, Ram. And that's right around where he'd been shot. But Ram is also a shortened version of Rama, one of the manifestations of the god Vishnu, the preserver. The two best known avatars of Vishnu are Rama and Krishna. Now, interestingly enough, Krishna is a Sanskrit word meaning the anointed one, or something like the charismatic one. And there's a word in Greek that comes from the exact same root. You know what that word is? It's Christos. So the word Christ in the West, around the world, means the anointed one as well. Now, there's some differences between Christ and Krishna, and yet, there's some real parallels there. I don't mean to imply that all religions are the same. They are not. And yet, they speak to universal truths in the way they frame ideas, and they tend to resonate with each other. And the more here's an academic term, exoteric people get, drawing lines in the sand. I believe this and so forth. The more I think religions, in my judgment, tend to pull us astray. And yet the more esoteric or inward we go, the more similar they are. There are religious practices from the world over. And if you believe in the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung's idea of what he calls synchronicity, that different ideas arise in different parts of the world at the same time among people who couldn't have possibly been in touch with each other. A secular example might be Newton and Leibniz coming up with the calculus at the same time, totally independently of each other, to make college freshmen miserable. And yet, when we meditate, Sarah led us in a beautiful meditation with Deepak Chopra, and there are so many similarities in his Hindu background with other background. In fact, the first time I really engaged some of these religions before I got to know them well, not that anybody really knows anything well, but you know what I mean. I happened to grow up Catholic, and there was a Catholic priest, a guy named Thomas Merton. And I got a hold of his books as a kid in high school, and I read pretty much everything he wrote. And he was really into this business of everything is from the one, that we all connect, and there are different ways of connecting, but part of knowing each other and appreciating each other is to get a sense of how we connect to the infinite. And that's what kind of his life mission was. And there are other people like that. Here's another thing that the band was talking about today. Peace is within, There's a sense in esoteric traditions the world over that we carry peace within us. What is peacefulness? It's not something you do, it's something you are. So I'm going to tell a story on my dear friend Tom Boyd, who's about as close to an enlightened soul as anybody I know. Tom is a wonderful guy, but he's not that good a driver. So here he is on Lindsay one day, minding his own business and driving to the university, and he cut somebody off, and the guy he cut off was in one of these big muscle trucks, And the guy jumps out. He said, "Get out of the car! Get out of the car! I'm going to kick your..." "Oh, Dr. Boyd, hi." And so Tom was telling me about this when it happened, and I said, "Tom, what are you doing getting out of the car? That you probably shouldn't have done that." He goes, "Well, the guy really seemed like he had something to say." And that's a great example, I think, of somebody who just carries peace with them, And peace manifests itself differently in something like that. I love being a college professor, but certain aspects of it I hate, really, truly hate, like faculty meetings. And the way I even met Tom Boyd in the first place was we just happened to be sitting next to each other at a faculty meeting one time. I said, "I don't know who this guy is, but he has the most beautiful spirit." And I waited till the meeting was over and introduced myself. And I said to him, what academics say to each other when they really mean, "Do you want to be my friend?" I said, "Tom, would you like to work on some papers together?" And so that's how we got started, working on papers together. And here's this sense of God with skin on, for lack of a better term. We are all enlightened beings. And I subscribe to this idea of Satori in Zen, that we're all enlightened, but we have to find that enlightenment in us, and it may take however long it might take, multiple lifetimes. And yet there are different takes on this. The Vedas originally talked about a caste system, and there was a lot of misery and pain that came through the caste system. And yet, the world itself was going through massive changes from the years maybe say 900 to about 400 BC, about 2,500 years ago. Think about this. Many of the great religions got their start then. Lao Tzu lived about 500 BC. Confucius lived about 500 BC, but also Socrates lived about that time. And the prophets in Israel were doing their thing around that time. Synchronicity. There's another good example of synchronicity. So much so that historians now refer to this time by a name. They call it the axial age. And something that happened during the axial age is that the Buddha was walking on the face of the earth too. And he grew up also as part of the warrior caste, the Kshatriya. But he opted out. And he went out into the forest. There's a tradition in Hinduism to go through, actually sort of later in life, when you're at the stage of life, maybe I am, or in early retirement, that kind of thing, to go out into the forest. They call it a vanaprastya. And yet, the Buddha was not the Buddha yet, because the Buddha means the enlightened one. He was Siddhartha Gautama. And he went out into the wilderness. Interestingly enough, kind of like Jesus does at the beginning of his ministry. Before Jesus does anything, before he does his first miracle, he doesn't just jump into it. He goes into the wilderness for 40 days. And 40 is just a number. Could have been any number of days. That's just the way they used to say things. But interestingly enough, at the end of his life, Jesus, when he dies, he rises and then stays on the earth for how long before he ascends into heaven? 40 days. 40 days, interestingly enough. It parallels the time in the desert of 40 years. And you see this kind of theme in virtually every religion. There's what Joseph Campbell refers to in Hero with 1,000 Faces as the trajectory of myth. Now, a way to look at myth, that's just a myth, it's not true, and that kind of thing. That's a way to look at it. But I like this other way, which is to say myths many times carry a truth that's bigger than just the facts. And one of the myths or the stories or the greatest, some of the greatest ones seem like they might have started in fact somewhere, and yet they have kind of phantasmagoric things happening in them. And one of the stories that came out during the Axial Age was the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God, 18 chapters. 18 chapters redacted from the longest poem in the history of humankind, something called the Mahabharata. Mahabharata, if you put the Iliad and the Odyssey together and got their length and multiplied it by 8, you get the length of the Mahabharata. Yeah. And these characters kind of keep coming in and out and so forth. And the Mahabharata tells this wonderful story, and it's centered on two major characters and some minor characters who turn out to be not so minor, pretty important. Major character is Krishna, this manifestation of Vishnu. Now, the term for that is an avatar, you know? And I think, but boy, when my girls were little and they were talking about avatar, I thought, boy, those kids, I'm glad I read them the Bhagavad Gita, you know, and that was the first I heard about computer avatars, okay? But the avatars were around way before this, right? And an avatar is a manifestation of a god or goddess. And the two major best known avatars of Vishnu, the preserver, are Krishna and Rama. But, you know, people pull things through their own lenses. And there was a great Christian preacher, a guy named Billy Graham, who went to India, and he was given a big call to the altar and so forth. And hardly anybody was coming down in this big stadium. And somebody said, Billy, that guy over there, that guy sitting over there is kind of the guru. If you get him, a lot of people will come, hundreds, thousands will come. And so Billy just keeps talking, and eventually that guy comes down to receive Jesus Christ as his personal Lord and Savior. Billy's so enamored with this. He invites the guy up to have tea. And Billy Graham says, how did you come to make Jesus Christ your own personal Lord and Savior? And he said, oh, Jesus Christ, great avatar of Vishnu. And so, you know, we all pull things through our own lenses. And actually in Sanskrit, there's a word for this, Maya. We get the word magic, it comes from the same root, but Maya gets translated as illusion. And yet, probably a better way to think of Maya is not just illusion, like, oh, we just dreamed something up and you know, but it's the schemas or paradigms or cognitive frameworks, maybe might be the term, that you carry with you throughout life. You can kind of think of them, you know, like if you go to education school to be a teacher and they talk about the theories of Jean Piaget and how he saw the importance of schema. And one of the lessons there is, if somebody doesn't have a schema, an underlying framework for something, you can keep beating them over the head and thinking how dumb they are. Or if you're a good teacher, you might just drop back and say, okay, they don't have the schema yet. You know, before you do calculus, do algebra. Before you do that, do arithmetic, you know, make sure you know it well. And so this idea of Maya is what we carry, is these schemas are what we carry with us. And to recognize in a student, a teacher must recognize in a student what schemas they're carrying with them. And the Buddha had a term for this. He called it skill in means. Skill in means. The ability to talk to people on their own level. Somebody who's a good teacher can talk to really intelligent adults and can talk to kids and do just as well either way. And with that, I'm going to quit because I'm getting the time thing from the folks in the front. Namaste.